So Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, we know, are competing against each other for the Democratic nomination. And so far, of course, they have both focused on a lot of issues. Now, for example, Elizabeth Warren continues to put out policy after policy, sometimes very detailed, while Sanders, of course, puts out his own policy, but is also getting young people behind FDR-style New Deal policies like Medicare for All. So, and of course, explaining what democratic socialism means, right? Now, together, both of them are actually pretty high in the polls. Most polls have Bernie Sanders at number 2, Warren at number 3. And of course, it differs in some of the states. But generally, that's how it goes, at least when it comes to national averages. Now, this is while candidates like Buttigieg, Robert Francis O'Rourke, and Kamala Harris have actually failed to rise. Now, the question, on my mind at least, is Bernie Sanders going to go after Elizabeth Warren? Or is Elizabeth Warren going to attack Bernie Sanders? Instead of rolling out new policies and hitting Donald Trump as they have been doing. Now, I for one, say yes, let's focus on policy, right? And I hope most of you feel the same. But here's the thing. I think the establishment wants to try to get them into a fight. So now let me explain, right? Now, recently there's been some articles that have come out with some provocative headlines. For example, earlier this month, you had Vanity Fair coming out with this. A lot of Bernie support seems to be drifting to Warren. As Sanders reprises greatest hits, Elizabeth Warren is surging. Now, again, that happens to be your standard sort of establishment headline. But in this case, it is a little bit provocative. And when you think about it, it does kind of sound like they want to pit Warren versus Sanders. Now, in it, they talked to a Democratic strategist and supposed Sanders ally who was not named, and they said this, quote, "If you had talked to me in 18 or 17 about Warren, I would have said to you, I don't see how she gets to Bernie's left. And she's done it." That's partly sloppiness on his part. His candidacy this time around has ended up being a greatest hits act. What new energy or idea is he bringing to the table? Warren has outmaneuvered him on policy. What new idea or energy? Well, I don't know. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders' embrace of progressive foreign policy. That's something that, unfortunately, Warren is not doing as well on, and I wish he would actually do better. Criticize, Israel and avoid war with Iran. And so those are some problem issues, but I'm not trying to criticize Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders too much, but I'm just trying to be honest about where their positions actually are. As far as this so-called ally of Bernie Sanders, I think whoever that is wrong. Look, in reality, in general, they support very similar policies. Bernie Sanders is on the left of Elizabeth Warren when it comes to Medicare for All. Why? Because she said she's open to other things and has sort of waffled, unfortunately, on the issue of Medicare for All. Campaign finance reform, also something that Bernie Sanders is on the left of Elizabeth Warren on. They're both not taking corporate PAC money right now, but during an interview with TYT's Cenk Uygur, she admitted to being open to taking corporate money in the general election. Now that is, look, that's problematic, and I'm not in favor of that, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. But anyway, there's more. Another article comes out today, this time in Politico. Now, it came out with the title of "Centrists Are Coming Around to Elizabeth Warren as an Alternative to Bernie Sanders." Now, I looked at that, and I'm like, that's bait. It's a trap. It's a trap. Because as a progressive, you see that and immediately think, oh, that's it. Elizabeth Warren is getting all the establishment support. She's going down. Get her. Now, here's the thing, right? She actually is a little bit more friendly to the establishment than Bernie Sanders. However, at the same time, remember what Wall Street said about her. They said, anonymously, a CEO, it can't be Warren, it can't be Sanders. Wall Street does not like Elizabeth Warren at all. Remember that. Remember that. Besides, this entire article is basically talking to third way Democrats, right? And of course, they say it can't ever be Bernie. Anybody but Bernie, right? We'll even take Elizabeth Warren. Just please, no Bernie, no Bernie. And they, of course, see Bernie Sanders as the biggest threat because he is a little bit more transformational than Elizabeth Warren. They have a different approach. Bernie Sanders says political revolution. Elizabeth Warren says, I'm going to still work within the system, but I do want to make changes. So there's that, right? Now, let me give you some of the quotes here. Actually, this is a tweet from Jim Kessler. He's a co-founder of the Third Way. He said, Elizabeth Warren kills it at Black Econ Alliance Candidate Forum. Love her entrepreneurship fund. Now, when that was tweeted out, of course, the attacks came. Elizabeth Warren, beloved by the establishment, right? Matt Bennett, another co-founder of Third Way, said that said of Sanders and Warren's policies, quote, one is a democratic capitalist narrative, the other is a socialist narrative. And they're further, of course, trying to divide Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, when in reality, they're both democratic capitalists. It's just Bernie Sanders is a little bit more transformational and to the left of Elizabeth Warren. But that said, those are the differences between them. But they're far closer to each other than anybody else in the field is close to them. And that's really, really important. Now, there's more here. This is a self-described moderate Democrat Reagan Gray, who's a healthcare policy and political consultant, who was at a Third Way conference. He said this, quote, I don't agree with Medicare for all. I don't agree with free college. But her consumer protection policies are great. I think she has a good infrastructure plan. I absolutely know and believe people are taking a second look at her. She now seems to be getting herself away from the Bernie Sanders grouping. People are taking a second look at her and saying, some of her policies are good. Maybe she isn't like Bernie. So now that is somebody who is a Third Way so-called moderate Democrat. Now, in reality, again, he is absolutely wrong. She is actually more like Bernie than someone like Cory Booker or Mayo Pete, right? Now, again, there are significant differences on some issues between Sanders and Warren, and those should be talked about, and I actually can't wait for the debates so they can differentiate themselves. But in reality, they're a lot like each other. Now, the differences mainly are foreign policy, right? Now, Bernie Sanders is better on the issues now than he was in 2016. He's better on the issue of Israel. He doesn't believe in the U.S. story about Iran bombing the tankers, which, of course, that's backed up by the Japanese. The Japanese are saying, Iran, we have no indication, or we don't believe that Iran attacked our tankers. And so Bernie Sanders says, well, I don't believe the U.S. account either. Whereas, unfortunately, Elizabeth Warren does buy into that. So that is a significant difference. Domestically, however, again, they are very similar, except like I said on healthcare. She's obviously more technocratic, a little bit more wonkish, and less radical. That doesn't mean that she's a bad person, and that doesn't mean that she would not upset the status quo. She would just do it less than Bernie Sanders. So that's really important to point out, right? And so here's what I'm trying to get at. With all that context, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have more in common with each other than the rest of the field. That's why Bernie Sanders is in number 2, and Elizabeth Warren is a close third. Now, the establishment knows that Joe Biden is gaffe-prone, and he might not last. So, why not get behind the slightly less radical Warren, since they are incredibly scared of Bernie Sanders, pump out a bunch of articles, gaslight people, and turn Warren and Sanders supporters against each other in order to try to knock Bernie out? Now think about it. A lot of my fellow Sanders supporters are already going after Warren supporters and Elizabeth Warren. When that happens, the corporate media picks up on it, and they run with the sexist Bernie bro narrative. Again, that is a ridiculous narrative, but they've got that ammunition now, right? Now, a lot of progressives that I know, at least, have Warren at number 2. Bernie Sanders is obviously their number 1, but they're like, hey, look, Elizabeth Warren, number 2, or number 3 behind Tulsi Gabbard, right? If we end up fighting amongst ourselves as progressives, the media is going to go after us, obviously, as they have, but also Bernie Sanders by pinning more, sexism charges, more Bernie bro crap, and they're going to try to use that to basically knock Sanders out of the race. Now, it's actually starting to work. I mean, you had member of the Justice Democrats, Wahid Shalit, coming out after Bernie Sanders had tweeted something out. Let me give you the quote here. He said, "The cat is out of the bag. The corporate wing of the Democratic Party is publicly anybody but Bernie. They know our progressive agenda of Medicare for all, breaking up the big banks, taking on drug companies, and raising wages is a real threat to the billionaire class." Waleed Shahid and a lot of these establishment pundits, and I'm not saying Wahid is one of those. Again, I just mentioned that he's Justice Democrat, right? A member of that group. Well, he had a very bad take because now they're saying, whoa, Bernie, why are you attacking Elizabeth Warren with that tweet? You just call her the establishment? Well, Elizabeth Warren wasn't even mentioned in that tweet. And the entire article was about what the third way wants. And the third way, of course, is saying, we're scared of Bernie, so yeah, we'll be okay with Elizabeth Warren because she won't be quite as bad for us as Bernie Sanders. Now, here's the thing, right? Now, the establishment, the third way, and this is what gets lost. They despise Warren too. She still represents too much change for the establishment. So odds are that if they did manage to knock Bernie out of the race, which I don't think is going to happen, but it definitely seems like the goal here, right? They would turn on her next. And then we would have either Biden, or if he's knocked out, Kamala Harris, Buttigieg, or Beto. Those are the people that were selected already by Wall Street. Those are the Wall Street favorites. And this is what could be happening here. I have this feeling that this propping up of Warren, and that's not her fault, right? I think this is nothing more than a cynical ploy to eliminate first Bernie Sanders and her by getting them to fight and in an ugly way. Now, if they end up fighting, of course, they don't push policy. And of course, where they differ the most is actually policy. But both of their policies are actually much better than anything else in the field. And so, unfortunately, this has already begun, as I pointed out. You have so many, and you just check out that Twitter thread. It's already terrible with progressives fighting each other, Bernie Sanders fans, Elizabeth Warren fans going after each other. It's already started. And that's unfortunate, right? And so they see that as an attack against Warren. Now, fun fact, right? After that tweet, I went and took a look at the headline for Politico. Now, that original Politico headline, right, is, as I told you guys, what was it? Centrists are coming around to Elizabeth Warren as an alternative to Bernie Sanders, right? They stealth changed that to Warren emerges as potential compromise nominee. That's interesting. Why would they have to change that headline? Again, this is Politico. This is the establishment, right? Now, of course, they changed it to, I guess, where it's less provocative, but the damage is already done. Pundits everywhere are screaming, how dare you attack Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders? This is how you lost 2016. As for progressives, there's a quote in that article from the Third Way about how much they love Elizabeth Warren because, she's not 100% on Medicare for all, which is true, and that she's a team player for the Democrats. You guys are going to listen to Third Way? I'm just saying, are you guys going to listen to Third Way? You're going to take what they say at face value? Well, Politico's the establishment. And the third way is the establishment. And unfortunately, when progressives fight each other, when they split up, the establishment wins. So for me, look, I want to see Bernie Sanders, I want to see Elizabeth Warren continue to stay focused on the policy and not get into a mud fight. When you separate yourself, when you differentiate yourselves through your policies, well, then that's different. But Sanders supporters, Warren supporters, do not get into the mud. Sanders and Warren are miles away from the other candidates. We should be focused on taking out the establishment candidates, Biden, Buttigieg, Beto, Kamala Harris, all those other candidates, get them out of the field. And then, if Warren and Sanders are the only ones left, then you guys can have a contest of ideas. But right now, the establishment is target number one, not each other. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.